Good afternoon. Good afternoon to everyone. Thank you very
Good
much.
afternoon and good morning, depending on where you are. Good day at any rate. Minister, Deputy Ministers, Ambassadors, colleagues. I'm Bill Thompson. I'm the head of the OECD Eurasia Division, and I'm very pleased to be moderating this webinar, launching an investment policy review that many of us have been very pleased to see completed and very impressed by. I want to welcome Her Excellency the Minister, Nația Turnava, the Minister of Economy and Sustainable Development of Georgia, His Excellency Ambassador Karl Hartzell of the European Union delegation to Georgia, and our own very excellent Deputy Secretary General of the OECD, Masamichi Kono, who will speak to us shortly. I will refrain from discussing anything of the substance of today's webinar, but rather just begin with a few important technical points. First, we strongly request that you mute your microphone when you are not speaking. Otherwise, any kind of noise that occurs in the room or the place where you are, phones ringing, colleagues or children coming in and out is then heard by everyone. So you just need to unmute when you wish to take the floor. Secondly, if you wish to raise a question or make a comment during the open discussion, you can do so either by raising your hand in Zoom fashion, which means opening up the participants menu. And if you open the participants menu down on the lower left, you will see a little blue hand that allows you to signal that you wish to take the floor, and I will be watching that. Alternatively, I will also be watching the chat during the open discussion. If you wish to raise a question and don't find the hand icon, just type your question into the chat and we will come to you. Last technical issue, but a very important one, is that we are able to offer a simultaneous translation interpretation today, which is a great asset. You simply have to choose the interpretation menu, the little globe on your Zoom menu, and then you choose the language of interpretation that you require, either English or Georgian. Two very important points. The first is that we strongly recommend, although it's up to you, that you mute the original audio when you choose an interpretation language. Otherwise, you have a good chance of hearing both simultaneously, and that can interfere. Much more important, if you take the floor to speak, to raise a question or make an intervention or a comment, please turn interpretation off before you take the floor. If you yourself are speaking and you have interpretation on, it will create some interference for you, but it at times can also create interference and problems for others. That is all I want to say about the technology. I suspect we are all Zoom veterans by this stage in 2020. So without further ado, I'm very pleased to invite Mr. Masamichi Kono, the Deputy Secretary General of the OECD, to open today's discussion.
Thank you very much, Phil. Dear Minister Turnava, Deputy Ministers, Ambassadors, colleagues, on behalf of the OECD, I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's webinar to launch the very first OECD investment policy review of Georgia. And I thank you so much for joining us. I would like to thank all those who contributed to this work for their excellent collaboration, and especially the dedicated task force led by the Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development. And we are also grateful to the European Union for financial and technical support, which made this project possible under the EU for Business initiative. The launch of this review marks an important milestone in Georgia's relationship with the OECD. Georgia was peer-reviewed by the OECD Investment Committee at a special session held in September, during which OECD members commented positively and welcomed Georgia's long-term reform trajectory. As can be seen from the review, Georgia's reform path has been nothing short of remarkable. In less than 2 decades, a series of structural, regulatory, and economic reforms have propelled Georgia from one of the lowest income post-Soviet states to an upper middle income economy with one of the most open regimes in the world for foreign investors. However, Georgia, like much of the world, now faces the unprecedented health and economic consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. We know that the government took swift fiscal and monetary measures to support provision of healthcare and liquidity, and to assist firms and households. And disruptions to business, travel, remittances, and investment are nonetheless likely to have a severe near-term impact on the economy. And current projections suggest that GDP could contract by 5% this year. So private investment will be essential for economic recovery. And in this respect, the investment policy review offers a timely and comprehensive assessment of Georgia's climate for domestic and foreign investment by looking at a wide range of policy areas such as investment promotion, competition, agricultural value chains, and responsible business conduct. And Georgia's success in removing many of the obstacles to doing business is commendable. Successive reforms over the last 2 decades increased protection of investors and property rights and strengthened the judicial system, thereby improving Georgia's level playing field. Georgia has also made strides towards increasing awareness of responsible business conduct and is now perceived to be the least corrupt country in the Eastern Partner region. However, important challenges remain, and reforms have not translated into broad-based economic growth, and productivity growth remains low, I'm afraid. And unemployment and poverty, especially in rural areas, are still high. And although inward foreign direct investment stocks reached 107% of GDP in 2018, high volumes of investment are not translating into better lives for all as of yet. Today, as Georgia seeks to exit the crisis and pave the way to recovery, it will need policies that attract not only more, but better investment. And quality FDI will be key to triggering a new wave of productivity and innovation in the country and boosting worker skills, job quality, and gender equality. All of these elements will be central to building a more resilient, inclusive, and sustainable economy post-COVID that benefits all Georgians. The OECD's investment policy review of Georgia can be a useful tool to support the government in enacting targeted and effective policies in this regard. So I'm sure that this conference will be a fruitful and interesting discussion, and we look forward to our continued strong and valued cooperation with you. Didi Madlova, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Secretary General, Deputy Secretary General. I now pass the floor to Ms. Nasia Turnava, the Minister of Economy and Sustainable Development of Georgia, for some introductory words.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to express on behalf of the Georgian government and our ministry, I would like to express our gratitude towards OECD, towards European Union for your efforts, for your continuous support, which made this project possible. It is especially important for us in these challenging times. I would like to underline the importance of joint efforts and policy coordination between Georgia and OECD to support economic development of our country and increase private sector competitiveness. In this regard, I am excited that together we strengthen our cooperation and put efforts for faster improvement of business and investment climate. Regulatory framework of business environment and development of private sector support measures, which is critical for us, especially considering the fact that 2021 will be the year of economic recovery. I am more than happy that we can be proud with one more progress as Georgia has been ranked 8th on the OECD FDI Regulatory Restrictiveness Index. I hope that this acknowledgement of Georgia as one of the most open economies to foreign investment will be additional signal to draw foreign investors' attention to our country. The COVID-19 pandemic has delivered the largest economic shock the world economy has witnessed in decades. And the mitigation measures such as lockdowns and travel restrictions imposed by most countries to limit the spread of COVID-19 and ease the strain on healthcare system, of course, have sharply curbed consumption, investments, financial and commodity markets, global trade and tourism. Business restrictions has disrupted supply chains, increased unemployment and reduced consumption. As a consensus, in 2020, the world economy is expected to contract by 4.4 according to IMF estimates, while global FDI flows are expected to contract by at least 30% according to OECD forecast. Like rest of the world, Georgia's positive economic trajectory has also been interrupted. In January, October of this year, negative economic growth amounted to 5.1%. The shock is expected to cause a contraction of 5% in GDP in 2020, before rebounding by 4.3% in 2021. However, according to IMF projections, Georgia will ensure fastest economic recovery in medium term among regional and European countries. Consequently, medium-term growth is projected to remain unchanged at 5.3%, supported by infrastructure spending, supported by sustainable structural reforms to increase productivity and enhance private sector-led growth. Despite the challenges caused by the pandemic, we successfully continue our efforts to control the spread of virus and minimize economic damage. In order to support affected economic sectors, maintain jobs and ease the burden for the businesses and the public, we extended government benefits in form of wage subsidies, cash transfers to households. We expanded social transfers, temporary tax reliefs, and interest rate subsidies. The 2021 budget will continue to appropriately support the recovery while laying the groundwork for fiscal consolidation. We strongly believe that it is vital, now more than ever, to attract quality FDI to boost economic recovery. Despite the pandemic, Georgia remains an attractive investment destination, and I would like to point out with great pleasure that legal, business, and investment environment, due to the reforms conducted by the government of Georgia, with the support of international community, with the support of donors community, has been highly assessed in international rankings by various international rating institutions. It should be underlined that in addition to the 8th rank on the OECD FDI Regulatory Restrictiveness Index, Georgia has also improved its position in all major 2019-2020 international ratings. In particular, Georgia took 7th position in World Bank Doing Business 2020 amongst 190 countries, and has been listed on top 10 countries in economic freedom of the world 2020 by Fraser Institute. Noteworthy, Heritage Foundation Index of Economic Freedom 2020 has ranked Georgia to 12th position amongst 180 countries, and Transparency International ranked Georgia 44th amongst 180 countries in Corruption Perception Index. As mentioned, attraction of high quality and efficiency-seeking FDI that also promotes SME competitiveness, knowledge and technology transfer, and trade facilitation remains priority for the government. Georgia's FDI to GDP and FDI per capita is among the highest in the region and European countries as well. However, FDI quality and sectoral allocation still remains the main challenge. FDI flows has limited positive impact on export promotion and economic growth. Based on the recent trends, sectoral analysis, and our development goals, several priority sectors for investment attraction have been identified to promote post-COVID recovery, enhance productivity, and increase competitiveness on the global arena. These economic sectors include professional business services such as PPO and IT services, electrical and electronic production, including households and medical equipment, pharmaceutical products and medical research, renewable energy, clothes and textile and logistics, including distribution, refrigeration, storage, and so on. Some other sectors that can create the value, can create the jobs, of course, because it is also important target in post-COVID recovery period. It is noteworthy that in recent years, Georgia has made tangible progress in building strong economic fundamentals and institutional framework for private sector development that represents important prerequisite to swift economic recovery process. Although proactively dealing with the effects of the COVID-19 shock is the near-term priority, We remain committed to continuing implementation of the structural reform agenda and focusing on long-term development priorities. Despite delays due to the COVID-19 shock, we continue capital market development to support financial system diversification and more portfolio type investments. We are putting special emphasis on further development of business environment to support the economic recovery, notably by implementing the insolvency framework. Additionally, increasing efficiency of natural resource management and utilization represents the important aspect for productivity enhancement and sustainable economic growth. In this regard, we will promote energy savings and independence, security in energy supply, and energy efficiency principles. Furthermore, complex and large-scale reform in mining industry is ongoing. In conclusion, let me once again outline that OECD is a crucial partner for Georgia in its economic development. Thank you for your continuous support. Thank you for all of your efforts. I hope that you all have a very successful meeting. And thank you very much once again.
Minister, thank you very much for that excellent introduction and overview. And now, as we already mentioned, we're very grateful to the European Union for its support for our work with Georgia, not only financial support, but really also support with expertise and political support. And so it's a great pleasure to pass the floor now to Ambassador Hartzell, the head of the European Union's delegation in Georgia.
Thank you so much, William. Dear Minister, dear Natya, dear Deputy Secretary General, civil society and business representatives, it's a pleasure for me to participate to today's launch of the OECD Investment Policy Review. Congratulations to the OECD and the Georgian government for the efforts made and for achieving this comprehensive outcome despite these challenging times of COVID-19 that has dominated most of this year. I see this document as a very useful input to the ongoing EU association process and to the overall EU-Georgia economic relationship. I appreciate the fact that the review takes a broad and comprehensive grip on the topic of investment and delivers clear ideas for a multidimensional and cross-cutting policy approach that, among other things, puts a spotlight on ensuring the quality of investments and not just the quantity. The authors underline the need to ensure that investment policies deliver social and economic returns, which is indeed necessary both to ensure sustainable public support for reforms and economic development and for unleashing the full potential of Georgia's workforce. In the EU, we often speak of smart, sustainable, and inclusive growth, and this is a concept that we're also applying here in Georgia. The review furthermore makes clear that only searching for low-hanging fruits, quick wins, and easy solutions won't do the trick in the end. In order to fully unlock Georgia's potential, what is needed are complex all-government policies, recognizing the need of bringing together issues such as systemic judicial reforms to build investors' confidence, the addressing of gaps in infrastructure and connectivity, and working with determination to upgrade the skills of the workforce, to name a few. It's not just about improving regulatory constraints, but to target the whole investment climate, including the legal framework, investment promotion strategies and institutions, policies to promote responsible business conduct, and addressing impediments to growth in the priority sectors. Overall, I'm pleased to see that the EU's engagement here in Georgia already encompasses most, if not all, of the key areas highlighted in this report, as it means that we are going to be well positioned to back up a comprehensive investment strategy in a comprehensive way, also from our side. And let me underline here that we also stand ready to help with further analytical support and policy recommendations on the basis of this review. With these remarks, let me again thank the OECD, the Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development, and all the stakeholders for their support to this review. And I'm looking forward to participating in translating these recommendations next into action. Didi Madlova.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. I would now like to give the floor to OECD colleagues who will present the main points of the review. Mr. Stephen Thompson, the head of the OECD Investment Policy Reviews team, Mr. Mike Pfister, a senior policy analyst in the OECD's Regulatory Policy Division, and Ms. Laurent Cordes, who is a senior consultant for the OECD, who will present main findings, particularly on issues of responsible business conduct. Please, Stephen, you and your team have the floor.
Thank you, Bill, and good afternoon to everybody in Tbilisi. And thank you to the distinguished speakers for their opening remarks. I think we share their sentiments fully in what they expressed. Let me also thank the EU, under the EU for Business program, for supporting this review, and the Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development for being our very diligent and dedicated counterpart throughout the whole process, as well as other stakeholders, the Investors Council, Enterprise Georgia, and many others. Now, to be honest, this has been a challenging, no, not yet, but well, you can go there if you want. It's been a challenging review in a way, but I think in a positive way. In some reviews, when we start, there's so many things to do that we don't even know where to start. So in Myanmar, for example, the first review, we had 80 recommendations, all the way from low-hanging fruit to the top of the tree. And now in Georgia, though, it's the opposite situation. We confronted an environment where already in the international rankings, as Minister Tsunava said, Georgia does very well. So that's usually the first place we look for evidence of a dysfunctional investment climate. And then also when we look at what sort of recommendations could we make, we also saw that many of them are already being undertaken as part of the association agreement with the EU. So when we started, we sort of looked around where can we add value? But I think in the end, you'll agree that we draw on experience in over 35 countries doing these types of reviews. And I think we've made some solid recommendations. Now, of course, in spite of Georgia's success, there are many challenges that remain. If you're in Tbilisi, if you're working with Georgia on a daily basis, you might sort of take for granted the reforms, the success, the depth of the reforms that Georgia has undertaken. But believe me, from our experience working with countries worldwide, Georgia stands out. The capacity for reform in Georgia is rare from our experience. Now, turning to the scope of the review, as Ambassador Hartzell mentioned, it's a comprehensive review. The assessment and recommendations in Chapter 1 is really a summary of the whole report. It includes the context, it includes a summary of the chapters, and also the key recommendations. So if you don't have time to read 300 pages, we can't seem to say anything in less than 300 pages, you can look at the assessment and recommendations. And then, of course, we look at FDI trends and impact, quality of investment, as was mentioned in the speeches. We look at the domestic regulatory framework, investor protection, but also the approach to treaties. We have a special chapter on promoting sustainable investment in Georgia's agri-food value chains. We're not saying that Georgia should promote agriculture over other sectors, but clearly it's an important sector for exports. It's an important sector for productivity, for improving productivity growth. We also look at investment promotion and facilitation. In many countries, the investment climate has so many flaws, if you like, that the investment promotion agency has a very difficult time trying to promote investment. But Georgia has a very solid basis to promote investment effectively. So we have a lot of recommendations in that chapter. And finally, we look at responsible business conduct. We always look at responsible business conduct in reviews. Of course, when businesses act responsibly, they're more likely to be sustainable and inclusive outcomes. But also we argue that it can be an investment attraction strategy, that if investors feel that they're not likely to suffer reputational risks from investing in a country, they are more likely perhaps to invest there. Next slide, please. Well, everybody knows how Georgia does in doing business. There's no comparison. I think it's up there with Singapore in terms of starting a business. So I don't think, it's seventh overall, as Minister Tanava mentioned. But, of course, it doesn't perform as well in all areas resolving insolvency. It's 64th. But overall, it's a very, very good performance. And it's clearly picking up something. All the countries we work with want to improve their doing business rankings. Everybody has a task force to improve their rankings in doing business, and yet somehow Georgia manages to do it while other countries don't. But I think it's worth pointing out as well that it shouldn't be an end in itself, and that doing business improvements in the ranking are not always correlated with increased FDI inflows. They're not always correlated with an impact in terms of sustainability and inclusiveness from those inflows. So it's a good starting point, but it by itself, it's not enough. And I think the government, in our discussions with them, I think the government clearly understands this. Now, it's perhaps an obvious point, but I think it's worth repeating that, if governments are going to remove regulations because they're ineffective or unnecessary, it should really be on the basis of regulatory impact assessments, and not solely to improve the rankings, international rankings. And we've, in a sense, doing business is a victim of its own success, because countries are so eager to improve their rankings that maybe sometimes they don't go through the full regulatory impact assessment. But I'm not saying this is particularly the case for Georgia. Georgia has done very well, but it is sort of a caution about doing business. Next, please. Yeah. So the minister also mentioned, of course, Georgia is 8th in our ranking. The OECD FDI Regulatory Restrictiveness Index, it looks at statutory discrimination against foreign investors. So it only looks at what you have in the books. It doesn't look at how you implement regulations or your restrictions. The higher the score, the more restrictive the country. You can see that countries in MENA and Southeast Asia, some of them are among the most restrictive worldwide. Georgia, of course, is at the other end. It's roughly level with Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, the Baltic states, which of course are among the most active reformers in the former Soviet Union, and of course now all OECD members. Next, please. Well, I think we all know that this reform experience is commendable. You can't say it enough, I think. But at the same time, as was mentioned in the speeches earlier, as DSG Kono said, it hasn't always led to better lives across Georgia. So we know that what the challenges are in terms of broad-based economic growth. One is productivity growth is weak. Exports are below potential. They're not diversified, as the minister mentioned. Poverty is high, and particularly rural areas. Underemployment and unemployment are high. There's a skills gap, and the quality of suppliers is not always up to what is required by OECD investors. And of course, there are infrastructure and connectivity challenges. So in a sense, I suppose the overall conclusion is Georgia has removed, the de jure barriers to FDI, but it's now time to move beyond that and to look at how to increase the quality of FDI that they receive, how to create an environment, an investment climate that promotes sustainability and inclusiveness. And we hope that our recommendations will contribute to this goal. Next, please. Well, let's begin with the FDI trends. It's the usual chapter 2 in our reviews. One of the first things we look at. Next, please. Now, Georgia has done, on a per capita basis, Georgia has done well in attracting investment. And I think some of our earlier drafts of this review, we perhaps didn't give them enough credit, but clearly they've done well in attracting investment, given the size of their economy. But if you look at the trend over time, you can see that FDI inflows have basically, since 2009 or so, basically just kept up with the growth of GDP. They haven't increased beyond normal GDP growth. And if you look on the right side, you can see that a lot of it is now reinvested earnings rather than equity investments, which could be either greenfield or mergers and acquisitions. Now, it's not that surprising, perhaps. In 2019, worldwide, half of all investment was actually reinvestment. It's not new investment. I mean, it's not coming new from outside. It's reinvestment of existing affiliates. And that's an equally important investment in terms of the impact that it might have on the economy. And of course, keeping investors happy, existing investors happy, is as important as promoting new investment in a way. But clearly, if you're not getting new investment, if it's the existing affiliates reinvesting, you're not contributing to diversification in terms of FDI home countries or sectors. It's more of the same each year in a sense. And of course, with COVID-19, it's going to be more difficult for countries to attract investment in the near term. Next slide, please. Well, I think as Minister Tanaba mentioned, there hasn't been enough investment going into export-oriented sectors. There's some in tourism and renewable energy, but there hasn't been enough in the sectors that Georgia wants to promote to increase integration with the global economy, with the European economy. And the sectors that have received investment have not necessarily contributed the most to job creation or to productivity growth. Yes, Georgia is receiving a lot of investment relative to on a per capita basis, but it's not yet getting the investment that will integrate it into global value chains and into the global economy sufficiently. Next, please. Excuse me. Well, as Minister Tanaba mentioned, the word quality FDI, and that's exactly what we look at the OECD. We call it FDI qualities. How does FDI contribute to positive development outcomes in each country? And when we do an investment policy review, we always look at this. Now, FDI can contribute there are two different channels in a way. One is an investor invests and is more productive than its competitors in the economy. So it raises the productivity at that sort of sectoral level. But beyond that, investors can invest in sectors which are themselves more productive and thereby pushing overall aggregate productivity in the economy. So there are two channels. These two channels combine, and we need to look at both of them to understand how is foreign direct investment contributing to the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals in each country. And you can see here that in terms of employment growth, training, and energy efficiency, foreign manufacturers, we're only looking at manufacturing, foreign manufacturers have a strong positive impact in Georgia compared to domestic firms. Much more so, in fact, than in the Eastern region, Central Asia, Southeast Europe, and so on. So a very significant benefit is accruing in these areas from foreign investment. There's positive influences also on the average wage, on labor productivity, but less of an outlier in that sense. The only one that is below the line is in terms of gender balance, share of female employees. And this is probably because foreign investment going into Georgia is in infrastructure and capital intensive sectors, which tend to have a lower ratio of female employment. But overall, I think you can see that there is a positive outcome from the investment that Georgia is receiving. But this is only a snapshot. We're not saying that Georgia will never benefit in terms of gender balance from investment. It's just what has happened so far. And the question going forward is how perhaps could Enterprise Georgia or some other body sort of push the balance between the positive impact and less of an impact. So how can the government influence this outcome? Next slide, please. Well, we always look, it's an investment policy review. Of course, it's comprehensive, but of course, we also always look at investment policy. So we look both at the domestic regulatory framework and investor protection, and also the investor protection accorded to foreign investors in international investment agreements. Next, please. Well, we have several recommendations here. I'll go through them quickly, but I think at this level of generality, they might seem a bit too high level in a sense. But if you look at the actual chapter, you'll see that there are some very concrete recommendations underpinning them. Now, the first recommendation is about the investment law. It was called, I think in Georgia 2020 strategy, it was called outdated and disconnected from reality. And there are some articles, Article 7 notably on expropriation, where there could be greater clarity on expropriation. There are many different laws in Georgia and the Constitution which affect protection of investors against expropriation, but it's not very clear exactly how they interact with each other. We also, of course, look at intellectual property laws, and of course, under the DCFTA, the Deep and Comprehensive FTA, there are a number of commitments that Georgia has undertaken, but we recommend, of course, to continue to improve the effectiveness of enforcement measures for IP rights. As Ambassador Hartzell mentioned, of course, there are reforms needed to strengthen the independence of the judiciary and broader judicial reform. This, I think, we encounter in every country we've worked in Eurasia. I think we always have a recommendation on improving the judiciary, but not just in Asia, in Eurasia, also beyond in other countries as well. It's a very difficult process, a long process. We have some recommendations on steps that could be taken. We don't advocate either for specialized courts or specialized judges. There are arguments how to resolve this issue, but clearly training for judiciary, for the judges is important as well. We look at the arbitration law to improve legal certainty, what could be done to improve legal certainty, and also how to promote arbitration and mediation within the economy. We look at land as well. The land laws provide a clear framework for property rights, but the government should complete the universal land registration reforms. And in the chapter on agriculture, we have a lot more to say about land. And also a new area that we're looking at in the reviews now is data protection and cybersecurity. There are well-developed laws and institutions, but it should be maintained as a national policy priority. It's obviously going to become more important in the future. Next slide, please. Now, I won't say much about the approach to treaties. I don't think that's the core issue. I mean, it's an important issue for all governments, but I don't think it's a core issue in this review. Treaty approaches differ, of course, across countries and over time. OECD members generally in the investment committee favor more investor protection, but they have very many different ways in which they achieve that outcome. And of course, there's a weak empirical link between treaties and actual investment flows. So it's caused some governments to reevaluate the approach to treaties, also when there are rising cases from these treaties. So these are the types of recommendations that we make in almost any review. Government should continually reassess and update the priorities for investment treaties. I mean, we've listed some of the core areas that they might want to look at. Fair and equitable treatment, investor-state dispute settlement, and so on. And also to ensure that sufficient policy space. I mean, the right to regulate is now, I think, perhaps well recognized, but it might actually be increasing in the future with the pandemic, with the environmental crisis, with climate change. There might be actually more of a need for policy space going forward than in the past. And then also, we encourage Georgia to participate in international discussions, the evolution of treaties. The OECD is one forum for such discussions. And if Georgia were to adhere to our instrument on international investment, it would participate in the discussions at the OECD Investment Committee. Next. Well, turning to the agri-food value chain, next slide, please. I'll go through these quickly. It's obviously an important sector in Georgia. We all know that. It accounts for 10% of GDP, but 44% of employment, which obviously, if you do the math, suggests very low productivity in the sector. But Georgia has very favorable conditions for the sector, not least water resources. But FDI flows are still below potential. Most investment is still domestic. There might be a bit more investment in food processing, but overall, there has not been that much investment yet. And most of the exports from this sector are highly concentrated in beverages. I think it's about 37%. And of course, the farm sector is highly fragmented. I think the average farm size is 1.4 hectares, which is about the size of a suburban lawn, I think, in the United States. And productivity and wages are low, as I mentioned. So next slide, please. So to go through the recommendations quickly, we suggest the government introduce an objective on investment promotion and facilitation, a specific objective, both in the agricultural, rural development strategy, but also in the action plan for 21 to 23. We advocate for a clear and predictable framework for prospective investors to obtain agricultural land, ensure the completion of land registration reform, as I mentioned earlier, provide credit, strengthen the provision of credit guarantees for local SMEs, improve transport and utility infrastructure so that farmers have access to markets beyond simply the local market, rehabilitate outdated irrigation infrastructure. Of course, water is a strong resource in Georgia, and improve internet access. And then we have recommendations on perhaps on increasing the linkages between local SMEs and foreign investors, which is a difficult process, but an important one to ensure gains from investment. This could include targeted incentives, for example, to prospective investors, conditional on their engagement with small-scale producers, but it also requires efforts to build local absorptive capacity in SMEs. And then develop well-resourced and functioning agricultural training institutes, extension services, and so on. So you can see that, and finally, to strengthen food safety and quality standards. So you can see that these are very specific recommendations. You'll find the same sort of practical recommendations in each chapter, not just high-level recommendations for judicial reform, but really some very practical ones going forward. So I will stop there because we have two more chapters, one on investment promotion, one on responsible business conduct that my colleagues will present. On investment promotion, we had very long discussions and very fruitful discussions with Enterprise Georgia. And I think to do justice to these discussions, I should let the expert, one of the authors of the chapter, Mike Pfister, present. Dr. Pfister, if you like.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And also just a very warm good afternoon from my side to the BC, Your Excellencies and distinguished participants. I think it's quite clear from the discussion so far that reforming the investment climate is extremely complex. It's the investment climate is an extremely complex organism, many different organs that need to work together and in sync. And I think the discussion so far really pinpoints to that. And like Dr. Thompson said earlier, in many countries, people are very quick to look at the investment promotion agency for solutions in terms of fixing the investment climate. That is a very unfair position for an IPA, an investment promotion agency, to find itself in, because a lot of the issues that will have an effect on the investment climate lie way beyond the remit of an investment promotion agency. So that's also something to keep in mind when we look at the recommendations from this review. And however, we do know that by basically doing competent and modern proactive investment promotion and facilitation, you can do a lot, particularly when it pertains to the coordination of investment promotion activities across the economy. And actually, if the investment promotion agency can really be the useful link between the private sector and public policies, both in terms of providing feedback, but also in the development of public policies. I think Dr. Thompson mentioned the importance of regulatory impact assessments before you both ex ante and ex post when you prepare new laws and new regulations, and of course being able to channel stakeholders' views and experiences into the policy development process is extremely important. And there in the I would say in the sphere, in the area of investment promotion and facilitation, being able to channel the views of the private sector into the public policy development steps is absolutely critical. So I think that those are some of the elements where, you know, an investment promotion agency can play, I would say, we can fairly say so, a good role. So maybe we can have the next slide, please. So we've seen, of course, that you know, Georgia is one of the easiest countries in which to do business. We can comfortably say that, and in that sense, it was also for us that work with a number of IPAs across the world. It was a very, I think, it was a very fruitful review also for us. We learned a lot, but particularly we're able to have very informed discussions with other investment promotion agencies to then basically sound out some possible recommendations that we can then put to the table for Georgia. Of course, Georgia had the I think we have the benefit of having seen a large-scale liberalization and deregulation type of reforms wave into 2000. So a lot of the history and the success of being able to promote investment basically has its roots in this liberalization and deregulation process. However, we have seen, and I think Dr. Thompson has touched upon it a number of times already, the ability to deregulate has reached its natural limit, particularly if you want to go into not only more investment that does contribute to your sustainable development goals and you know, objectives of inclusiveness and sustainability. And this also includes, you know, the government's ambition to attract investment into other sectors, priority sectors that were not there 20, 30 years ago, in particular high value added sectors such as business process outsourcing, BPO, etc., which is a very different, I would say, present a very different challenge in terms of attracting investment than if you were to attract investment into infrastructure, greenfield investment in infrastructure, ports, etc. What we have seen, of course, also is that over the recent years, and I think the minister alluded to already, a lot of reforms that are happening. So while, of course, deregulation has slowed down, which is probably a good thing at this point, other reforms have started to emerge, and this has also translated into some institutional changes over the recent years. So we have taken note of these, and these are just some, particularly those that pertain to, I would say, the function of promoting and facilitating investment into Georgia. I think one very important one is the one that happened in 2017, where Enterprise Georgia, which was traditionally the Enterprise Development and Export Promotion Agency, has absorbed the Investment Promotion Agency from the Prime Minister's office in 2017. So in a way, the Investment Promotion Agency is now part of a bigger, you know, powerful agency. Enterprise Georgia already has very strong export promotion and enterprise development, I would say, programs, activities, functions, and is recognized as such. So I think there's some very strong potential synergies, which we'll discuss a bit later, for investment promotion. There's also, you know, I would say, a recognized momentum to foster innovation. JITA, as the National Innovation Promotion Agency, is extremely active in this regard, and there again, this poses some, I would say, some very interesting opportunities for investment promotion as well, particularly if you want to attract investment into higher value added sectors. And I think what was very, very clear from our assessment is that you've got very powerful stakeholders who are active and can support investment promotion activities in Georgia. I mean, you have the Georgia Chamber of Commerce, which is really the sounding board of the private sector. You have the Investors Council, which can be extremely powerful in channeling proposals for reforms to the government. So again, these are very, very powerful ingredients for good investment promotion and facilitation in Georgia. And these elements and these movements, if you will, the initiatives also maturing. Something that we have seen very recently, of course, that Enterprise Georgia has come out with a new investment promotion strategy, which is very, very good. And in fact, a lot of these discussions, we started this review, I would say, almost 2 years ago. And a lot of the discussions that we had back then would be very different today, because a lot has happened in between. As I said, this new investment promotion strategy is one example. A lot more resources have been put into the investment promotion function as such. When we started with this review process, I would say the investment promotion department, if you will, within Enterprise Georgia, the one that was absorbed in 2017, was very, very small. It has grown considerably, which is, I think, which is a sign of how serious Georgia takes the function of investment promotion. But I think more importantly than the mere resources that are put into investment promotion in terms of, I would say, headcounts and financial resources, is how it will manage the synergies with export development and enterprise development. And I think these are some of the most strategic elements of recommendations that we can talk about in a few minutes. There's also new efforts in strategic communications, which is linked to, I would say, on the one hand, the synergies with other functions, but also the communications with other stakeholders. And this leads me to my last point here, is that we've seen a considerable professionalization of the investment promotion function within Enterprise Georgia. There has been the implementation of a CRM program, which is working from what we can tell very, very well. There's some new strategic staff that has joined the Enterprise Georgia to support the leadership on the one hand, but also there's a new strategic director to really support this function of strategic communications, which is very good. And one, I would say, a particularly progressive element that we've seen and that you really don't see very much, but it's an excellent example of how Georgia can use its foreign representations, embassies, if you will, in its investment promotion efforts. Embassies who are in key target markets. And there, Enterprise Georgia has produced some guidelines for investment promotion for these embassies. I think this is very important because in a lot of what we have seen is, in many cases, embassies would have a trade attaché that would be very active in trade promotion, but not so much investment promotion. These are two completely different the different tasks. Promoting trade is different from promoting investment. So for Enterprise Georgia, having actually come up with these guidelines for investment promotion for the embassies, I think is very commendable. And it's again one of those recommendations that we will actually, when we talk to other investment promotion agencies in the world, we will refer to this example as a very good one to how to strengthen, if you see, the international network of your investment promotion. You could have the next slide, please. So now just, of course, in terms of the ambitions to move towards more value-added sectors in terms of attracting investment and to be able to reach the ambitions of sustainability and inclusiveness, there will be some challenges, of course. And these have, of course, been exacerbated through the COVID pandemic. So this is a snapshot of some of the main challenges and some targeted recommendations in order to address these challenges. So I think first and foremost is the coordination of these, what we call powerful investment promotion actors that all undertake their own investment promotion activities. I think it's a very good starting position. I wouldn't call it a starting position. It's something that Georgia has built up over the past decades. The fact that you have very, very good investment promoters in the Georgian economies, but it is a challenge, of course, to coordinate investment promotion activities so that, for example, the private sector knows exactly who to go to as a first go-to point in terms of, when it has an issue with an investment, for example. So the investment promotion agency as such should really be recognized as the go-to agency, which can then channel the different requests or different requirements for action to other bodies in the government apparatus and the wider stakeholder complex. The second challenge, of course, is it's very nice and fluffy to talk about connecting investment promotion, export, and innovation, because conceptually one will quickly grasp the potentials and the opportunity which lie within this. However, in actually doing this, effectively on the ground is very, very difficult. And I already mentioned earlier, part of it is because some of these tasks are very different in nature. So it's one thing about to promote exports, is another thing to attract investment. However, if you manage to attract investment in export-oriented activity, then you're in a win-win situation. You may actually really, I would say both activities would really benefit highly from each other, just as an example. Now, the third challenge is what I already alluded to earlier, is really to strategically channel private sector insights into the investment promotion activities, to really have a mechanism in place where the dialogue is systematic, is fluid, and is one of cooperation, is one of open feedback, and always with the ultimate goal of improving Georgia as an investment climate. And there that's the point of oversight and guidance. As such, now Enterprise Georgia, for example, of course, reports to the Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development, but it doesn't have a board per se. We see in many investment promotion agencies across the world, particularly those that do very well, they will have some sort of a board where they have private sector representatives to basically help them guide the IPA in its investment promotion and facilitation activities. Now, that doesn't mean that you need a board. There's different mechanisms to do that. But what is important is that you do find a mechanism where you can actually channel private sector insights into your activities and also use, if you will, that mechanism as a sounding board. Of course, what I mentioned earlier, effectively tackling business climate issues, something goes beyond the remit of the Investment Promotion Agency. And that is a challenge that not only Georgia faces, that is the general challenge in what we call aftercare services. So we'll talk about that now. When I would just want to highlight a few of the recommendations that we have come up with, which are basically divided in some more strategic ones, the ones on the left side of your screen, and some more operational ones on the right side of your screen. I would say the first umbrella or chapeau type of recommendation is to develop a comprehensive investment policy statement. Now, this is different from the investment promotion strategy for Enterprise Georgia, which looks at sectors, how to target sectors, what are the instruments that go into that. An investment policy statement is more of sort of a government white paper that recognizes the importance, or that restates the importance of investment in Georgia's development strategy. And we feel that Georgia is ripe for such a step. And it is in such a policy statement that you will identify some of the actions that can be undertaken when it comes to particularly more strategic challenges of, for example, connecting investment promotion, export promotion, innovation development, and SME development. So this is what we think would really help connect the different issues and then provide clarity for the various actors. The second one is basically to keep enhancing the Invest in Georgia brand. Now, Invest in Georgia is the brand that the world knows for I would say for almost a decade. People recognize the business community, international business community. When you say Invest in Georgia, they know exactly what you're talking about. It is a recognized brand. It is the brand that is associated with the business climate reforms. Recently, of course, we know that Enterprise Georgia has undertaken considerable efforts, and I would say in keeping that brand strongly alive. There's a new website, for example. There's new communication material. Yes.
Can I just rush you along, because we still have one more of your colleagues to present, and I want to make sure there's some time for discussion.
Okay, I will do it in 1 minute.
Running a bit long.
Right, and of course, I mentioned already the importance of the oversight mechanism, and to formalize the strategic coordination for investment promotion. These are the strategic ones. Just on the operational side of things, keep strengthening the investment promotion function in Georgia is very good. So I think reviewing the staff, reviewing the budget, and what effect this increase in resources had would be very important. I would say the investment aftercare system is very crucial. Right now, the IPA has a very good pulse on the private sector. It knows what the issues are, but going down to the symptoms and where the problems actually lie, that goes beyond the IPA, and that is where connecting with different stakeholders again is very, very crucial. I will just jump very quickly to the last two recommendations, which are to continue to foster FDI SME linkages to make sure that investment contributes to sustainable development. There's more details that we can discuss in the discussions. And of course, helping to undertake investment promotion at the subnational level, because investment doesn't take place only in Tbilisi. It takes place in the regions, and this requires some dedicated attention and efforts as well. Thank you very much. Sorry for having taken a bit, but it's a fascinating topic with a lot of meat to discuss. Thank you. And I think now we can move to the chapter on responsible business conduct. Exactly. Lohan.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Yes, so good afternoon, Excellencies and everyone. I'll just briefly present the last chapter of the review, the chapter on responsible business conduct. You can go to the next slide already. You'll see that the first section of the chapter looks at responsible business conduct overall. So it gives kind of a baseline understanding of what we mean by responsible business conduct, why it is important for businesses, for investment, and for the government overall. And we also go into the international standards that underpin responsible business conduct, including the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises. I won't go into details, but you can refer to this first section as giving you really the big overview that will then kind of, that is the lens through which we looked at Georgia. Next slide, please. So I'll focus on the state of play for Georgia. Now, when we look at responsible business conduct, we look at different aspects of policy and implementation in the country. First, we look at the general context. So the awareness in the country on responsible business conduct issues among civil society, among business, among the government. We look at issues of coordination and coherence amongst government institution. And then we look at how this plays out in different sectors that are key aspects for RBC, responsible business conduct, such as human rights, anti-corruption, information disclosure and transparency, labor, environment. So that's a bit of the structure of actually the chapter that you'll see in the report. I'll go briefly through some of the points and then refer to you to the report for the others. In terms of awareness, the OECD had done a brief assessment of responsible business conduct in 2016, where awareness was considered very low. So what we've seen is that there's been an increase. There's been quite a lot of activities, notably from government departments, the Human Rights Secretariat, but also sectoral ministries such as labor, to kind of raise awareness on specific issues or RBC in general. There's been some activities by business association, civil society as well. But we can see that it's still limited. So the challenge would remain to kind of expand that awareness and particularly perhaps move from those business association multinational enterprises to small and medium enterprise, given the overwhelming number of SMEs in Georgia. So that's kind of the major challenge that many other countries in the world have. So how to kind of get SMEs in that responsible business conduct discussion. Policy coherence coordination, I'm going to talk about it later. I'll go to the sectors now. So I'll flag just on human rights and anti-corruption. I think we can see that broadly speaking, legal and institutional frameworks are in place. Other speakers have already mentioned Georgia's achievements in terms of anti-corruption and corruption perception ranking really, lack of corruption rather, ranking highly. There are always, the report looks at some areas of improvement. Other speakers have already mentioned the importance of the judiciary and judiciary reform for investment promotion. Of course, that also extremely important for human rights protection generally. And as a lens, this is the access to remedy lens for business-related abuse and impact. So there are things to kind of strengthen here as well. Access to remedy at the local level and at company level is something that a lot of countries and business enterprises struggle internationally, and this is something we haven't seen signs that there is that access to kind of remedy or grievance mechanisms for communities affected by a business, for instance. I want to focus more on the labor and environment side, because that's where we've seen most progress in the last few years. And that's probably where most progress was needed, because we've gone in both sectors from extreme deregularization of the sectors in the 2000s to now kind of a re-establishment and a strengthening of labor protection. Of course, labor, I need to mention the latest reform package that was adopted in late September that really strengthened the labor code in terms of overtime, for instance, or gender equality and non-discrimination, and also crucially, had adopted the law on labor inspection services that really strengthened the mandate of the labor inspectorate, makes it possible for that body to look at any labor conditions and in all sectors. While previously in previous years, it had been reestablished, but had a very limited mandate. So I'm glad the report could reflect these latest reforms, because these are extremely important, and it puts Georgia in a really good place to now really focus on implementation and focus on really protecting and addressing kind of the legacy of the deregularization in terms of occupational health and safety, for instance. Now, in terms of environment, a similar trend has been seen. There's been some really noteworthy reforms. For instance, the environmental impact assessment law was adopted a few years ago. There'll be probably more efforts to continue there in terms of additional bylaws that do need to be implemented, and then looking really at implementation, whether environmental impact assessments are really being conducted properly, whether they do pick on all environmental issues that particular business sectors would affect. And there, the report focuses on specific high-risk sectors, so sectors that we have assessed as potentially high risk for Georgia. And one clearly is the mining sector. So it's been mentioned already, there are ongoing reforms, and that's certainly something that the government should be encouraged to pursuing. What we would like to see is reforms that fully address the environmental and social impacts that have taken place in terms, for instance, on workers' conditions, occupational health and safety issues, pollution of the environment, but also impacts on communities' health, etc. I think that's one sector that requires quite a bit of attention and will be helped with now having that very strong regulatory framework on labor, for instance. That's something that can probably be implemented and applied to the mining sector. Next slide, please. I want to flag one area where the government could really demonstrate commitments on responsible business conduct and signal action for business enterprise. And also beyond that, actually lead by examples. And this is, we've got like one tool, one coordination tool, National Action Plan, and kind of 3 avenues in basically the state as an economic actor. So National Action Plans, the government's knows them well, is using National Action Plan for other things. It is a tool to signal action, to demonstrate commitments. The United Nations and the EU have been encouraging their member states to adopt self-standing NAPs on responsible business conduct or on business and human rights. So far, it's actually now 24 countries have adopted self-standing NAPs, 21 of which are OECD member countries. In Eastern European countries, it's still a developing and emerging practice. Now, what the government has been doing that is commendable is it has adopted a chapter on business and human rights in the National Action Plan on Human Rights for 2018 to 2020. There is an expectation or hope that there will be responsible business conduct objectives in the next NAP on human rights. I understand that at the moment, the government is not thinking of a self-standing NAP, but that would be something to probably consider long-term. Now, I just want to flag those 3 other issues, avenues, and leading by examples. Public procurement, investment promotion agency, and finally state-owned enterprise, which even though they are small numbers, they are large employers and large economic players. So these are areas where the government hasn't really articulated what it would want to do or its commitments in terms of responsible business conduct. So that's the idea of coherence and coordination. There are areas that could kind of be brought to the responsible business conduct dialogue. Next slide, and that would be the end. That would be the recommendations. So I'm not going to go into the recommendations because somehow it's the flip side. I've only flagged a few, but you'll see in the report that we have specific recommendations that kind of reflect these different aspects of RBC. So strengthening awareness and commitments, specific recommendations there on what to do it and where exactly, promoting policy coherence, as I've just discussed. And next slide, please. And then strengthening responsible business conduct in key areas. So I think the main message there is there have been quite a lot of reforms done in different sectors. Now it's the time probably for consolidation and increased coherence, and possibly also expanding avenues to strengthen responsible business conduct commitments in Georgia. So I hope that this has given you a flavor of the chapter, and I'll stop there and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we do have still a few minutes. I'm watching the clock, but we have a little bit of time for discussion, questions, comments. I ask you to keep them brief, 1 minute, maximum 2. But in particular, I would like to encourage the members of the dedicated task force to provide any quick comments they have. Yes, I see the ambassador of Latvia, please, Ambassador Belis.
Thank you, Bill. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Latvia congratulates Georgia with the OECD Georgia Investment Policy Review. It is an important milestone in Georgia's cooperation with the OECD, as it is first comprehensive review carried out in an OECD committee. We would also like to note the good and active cooperation with Georgia that is taking place in the OECD Eurasia Competitiveness Program. We are looking forward to the Eurasia Week in Tbilisi next year. You have our full support in enhancing Georgia's cooperation with OECD. Looking forward to continue working with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm just looking to see if there are other hands or questions raised in chat. I see George Welton, whom I was about to call on anyway. Please, from AmCham.
Yeah, thank you very much, George Welton, American Chamber of Commerce. I mean, I've spoken to you guys over the process of the development of this piece of work. And it's great. Thank you very much. Most appreciated. I just highlight a couple of specific things since we are very short on time. I think certainly what you highlight in terms of the fact that, you know, having nailed down this ease of doing business, free market environment, the need for certain kinds of proactive interventions, particularly to promote and push FDI attraction and export promotion, I think is very much in line with what a lot of people have now been thinking for a while. I mean, it lines up with the World Bank's from reformer to performer, and what a number of people have been commenting on, and so I think that's very valuable. I think particularly, I think also what you say about agriculture gets said quite a bit, but I think in particularly amongst people who are just looking at the economy generally, you know, can't be said often enough that in spite of the fact that agriculture continues to have lots of problems, it's one of the few areas we've seen really big expansion in recent times, and obviously an area that impacts a huge number of people. I think in terms of the general stuff that you've commented on, I've just highlighted a couple I think are great and a couple I'm a bit less enthusiastic about. On the great side of things, I do think the targeted incentives for investors, Misha and Enterprise Georgia, I saw he was on the call earlier, but I think he's now off, is clearly a good step in that direction already. I think there needs to be more of an effort to sort of understand how difficult it is to get certain kinds of supply chains to connect in the country, And we already begin to see some of the supports that will start to see that happen, particularly in helping to finance skills development and infrastructure and that sort of thing. Aftercare, you mentioned, continues to be crucial. Coordination of government agencies in these areas continues to be crucial. Land registration, and particularly for rural development, is terribly important. And it sort of seems to be going. And I particularly liked your ideas, and I'd be very interested to hear more about it and in some other format about how investment treaties might be able to give us some ways round some of the problems for judicial reform, because judicial reform has been the biggest problem forever. And if we just wait for that to get fixed, then nothing's going to happen. I'm a bit less convinced about the idea of more strategies / policy statements. Decentralization of policy of investment attraction is problematic to me because municipalities are just so incredibly weak in terms of their capacity to get anything done. And then finally, on the responsible business conduct, I mean, it's hard to argue against the concept, but as a guy who runs a business association, I have to once again highlight that the association agreement is pushing us significantly beyond where countries at our level of economic development tend to be in terms of alignment on human rights, on environmental standards, on labor protection, and so on and so on. And adding another raft of standards to sort of and hoops to jump through simultaneous with that seem problematic. That is undoubtedly more than my 2-minute limit, but there you go. Thank you very much.
Just over 2.5 though, not bad. Just over 2.5 on my stopwatch. Thank you. Others, I'm looking, I don't in fact see other hands up, perhaps, as I say, from members of the task force group. Or if while there is a pause, Stephen, you want to come back quickly on any of those points?
Well, I mean, on some of the points, they relate perhaps more to investment promotion, but on RBC, it's true, and what you say, George, it can be a challenge at Georgia's level of development. And in fact, I had that in my notes, but in the interest of time, I sort of skipped over that point. But yes, it is a challenge, and particularly a challenge when you're talking about SMEs. Even there, it's even more difficult. But I mean, it's becoming more and more important. It's not just good for its own sake, but it's becoming more and more important if you want to export to markets like the EU, that you can demonstrate this.
But my main point, Stephen, would not be that it shouldn't be a priority, but that the association agreements and the requirements of that have us already lining up against some pretty high standards in most of those areas. That would be my principle.
Let me
interject.
Sure, Laurent, please. Yeah, this is your passion.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can understand the worry about another thing. I didn't actually explain what responsible business conduct, what standards were behind it. And if you look at it, you'll see that there's actually perfect alignment. I don't know if the EU ambassador is still somewhere in the meeting, but he would explain more eloquently than I would do what the EU is doing in terms of responsible business conduct. The EU is actually one of the leader in pushing responsible business conduct and business and human rights. And these are reflected in the EU association agreements. So indeed, what is indeed being pushed in terms of human rights, in terms of labor protection, environmental legislation and reforms, that's already responsible business conduct. So whatever the government takes in terms of meeting the EU acquis as part of the agreement, that's one step to complete and to really ensure responsible business conduct to the country. Given that there is that link and that push from the EU, there is perfect alignment in this country. So it is not about adding new standards. It's about reinforcing and kind of looking at going beyond the EU agreement in terms of looking at all the issues that maybe some won't be in the EU agreements. I mean, there'll still be some issue that wouldn't, but even public procurement, for instance, there's an EU funded project that looks at environmental criteria for public procurement. So even the kind of areas you wouldn't necessarily think about as key are already there. Yeah, no, the EU is a strong proponent, so no fear there.
Okay, thank you. I'm still looking. I want to encourage Georgian colleagues, or even we have quite a few representatives of other countries in the region who might, from Belarus to Armenia to Central Asia, who might wish to raise a point or a question as well. We just have 3 or 4 minutes. And I know what happens on these occasions. Once I start to close the meeting, everybody starts clicking on the blue hand. So please take your take your opportunity while you can, or in the chat, use the chat function. I see Mikhail Hidorelli would like to make a comment. Please unmute and take the floor.
Thank you once again for a very fruitful cooperation and for all the good words, appreciating what we do as Invest in Georgia and Enterprise Georgia in general. I have some additional new things that we've done. I think since our last meeting, we have launched two very important new incentives. The first one is the FDI grants program, which is something definitely not done by Georgia for the first time, but definitely used by many different agencies. This is a government grant that can be spent on two purposes. This is workforce training and light infrastructure. And this FDI grant only includes the efficiency-seeking FDIs like automobile car parts manufacturing, electronic parts manufacturing, aerospace parts, and business process outsourcing. And I think we already have some companies that are already interested in that program. This is one. And the second thing is that we have, I think, extended our arms of investment attraction by contracting and partnering with a global company called OCO Global. The company will be definitely helping us to attract some investments. This is a company specialized in investment attraction. And again, these guys will be concentrated with us on the only efficiency-seeking FDIs, which is the part of our investment promotion strategy. Regarding the board, I think Investment Council plays a really good role as a, let's say, advisory board, because we have at least 4 meetings a year with them. And this board actually includes both government members and private sector members and donor organizations. So I think when we're talking about the board, I think Investment Council is a very good substitution, if not a good idea of the investment board itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mikhail. It's good to see you again. You look well. Now we're coming to the end of our time, but I would like, before we close up, to pass the floor back to the Georgian side, and in particular to one of the great friends of the OECD in Georgia. In fact, one of the great friends of the OECD, I think, in the region, Deputy Minister Katerina Mikabadze. Please.
Thank you, Bill, so much. Dear friends, colleagues, dear OECD representatives, it's my special honor to kind of sum up and make closing remarks. This is a really high-level event, and this is like very important for us, the launch of investment policy review. The support of the private sector development and improvement of investment climate is the main priority of our government, and that's why we requested support of the OECD in carrying out the investment policy review. This is underlining of our intention to take advantage of this opportunity. It should be noted that the cooperation between OECD and task force was very intensive and fruitful. That's why the document itself provides recommendations which are helpful and crucial for further development of investment environment in the country. As it was mentioned several times, country is one of the most open in this regard, but of course, further reforms are needed to strengthen our business climate and investment environment. That's why all the recommendations provided by the OECD is very important for us, especially in this pandemic especially in post-pandemic environment when attraction of FDI in productive sectors, export-oriented sectors, FDI which bring knowledge and new technologies in the country is crucial for development of our economy, for strengthening the life of our citizens. So let me thank first of all the OECD for this fruitful work done during the IPR. Special thanks to my colleagues, members of task force, for their very intensive involvement in the process. Thanks to my colleagues as well. Our ministry was made quite great job during the process. So thank you to the OECD and to European Union who financed the project, and I think, I hope recommendations which cover all the aspects of comprehensive framework for investment attraction will help us in further development. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister. Now I'd like to pass the floor back to Stephen Thompson for some brief closing remarks on the OECD side. And in particular, Stephen, I hope you might say a word or two about the question on agriculture, which we have in the chat.
You're really putting me on the spot there. The author of the agricultural chapter, I think, was the one to address that one. And I will forward it to him, and he will provide an answer. Well, I won't go through thanking everyone again. Of course, we are very grateful for the cooperation and the funding and everything else. Let me just be a bit forward-looking. This is the first country study that the OECD has done in Georgia, and perhaps we should think about how to build on this to do more work between the OECD and Georgia. What areas could we work on? There are a number of issues, a number of areas that came up in the review that perhaps we could work more on. Of course, this also depends on what the World Bank, the EBRD, what they already have planned in the future. We don't want to duplicate their work, but clearly these reviews do point, they're being so comprehensive, they do point to many areas where further work could be done, and we would welcome that. And then a final point, we've mentioned this several times over the past 2 years, the OECD Declaration on International Investment in Multinational Enterprises. It includes the guidelines for multinationals that Laurent mentioned in her presentation. It's a non-binding declaration of principle to not discriminate against foreign investors and to promote responsible business conduct. It's a way for Georgia, if you are interested in this, in applying to adherence to this instrument, it's a way for you to showcase reforms, to further promote RBC, to participate in the work of the investment committee, which covering a number of areas, national security, investment treaties, a number of areas that would be interesting, I think, for you. And also for us, I think it would be very interesting to have Georgia in the committee to present Georgia's experience, because as I said in my opening remarks, Georgia's experience is really a lesson that we will take when we do reviews in the future of other countries. We will take the lessons of Georgia's reform and try to explain to the rest of the world how to reform. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Just a very few last points before we all go our separate ways. First of all, I thank all of you for your participation, and I particularly thank our speakers, my OECD colleagues, Deputy Minister, the Minister, DSG Kono, and the Ambassador. for what I think has been a very rich discussion. Thanks to you all. Secondly, I do want to say a word of thanks to OECD colleagues whom you have not seen or heard from today. Those are the folk behind the scenes who are hosting the Zoom, managing the registrations and the invitations, making sure that this event works. There's a lot of work that goes into a complex online event like this, and I always am acutely aware of the fact that we have a terrific team doing this, and we really appreciate what they do. And the two people who have worked harder than anyone else on this call for the last 2 hours, in fact, would be our interpreters. So I hope you join me in thanking our interpreters for their work, because that's an exhausting business, particularly on such a complex topic. And finally, because this is the last of our big virtual OECD Eurasia events for 2020, I want to wish you all the very best for the holidays, to stay well, to stay sane, and to celebrate the holidays wherever you are, and begin 2021, which I think we can all hope will be a brighter, better, and altogether more normal new year. So thank you all very much and have a great day.
Thank you. Wish you very bright holidays, let me say, and hopefully next year will be better. And as we know, the Eurasia Week 2021, we hope that we will be able to host that event. So all the best.
Thank you.